While I do not qualify as a historian because I have neither the training nor the discipline to weed through primary source materials on my own, I do consider myself a history buff. I am fascinated by the stories to which I am connected, warts and all. And as tabletop role-playing games hold personal importance for me, I find reading the history of the hobby to be both informative and eye-opening. And after reading most of John Peterson's History of Early RPGs, and D&D in particular, I've just begun Volume 2 of Playing Out the World, although I think I'm going to bounce off of it to tell you the truth. I still find myself marveling at some of the things that everyone knows about the hobby, but tends to either misremember or just get wrong. These are some insights about the history of this hobby we love. Let's roll it. Did you know DM Tales has a merch store? If you are looking for some fun t-shirts or hoodies, I invite you to go check out and see designs like this one, which celebrates the awesome power of your dice curse. Anything I make from the store goes right back into the channel, so it's a great way to support a small channel like this one. All right, back to the video. Starting off, I want to thank my friend Martin from Daddy Rolled a One for looking at my manuscript as I was writing it. Martin is the best YouTuber on the history of D&D, and I can't recommend that you subscribe to his channel enough. Let's get to my insights. Old school play was not always deadly and gritty. Now, while Dave Artison's Blackmoor campaign was brutal, and Gary Gygax's penchant for murderous dungeons is on full display in things like Tomb of Horrors, that was not the universal play style in early D&D. In fact, certain regions had characters who reached up to 50th level in just the first few years of play. The Caltech group in particular was known for this. What did happen is TSR, and Gary Gygax in particular, led a charge in calling out groups which had these gift shop dungeons which allowed players to advance to extremely high levels. And Gygax pointed out that none of the characters in either Greyhawk or Blackmoor, which were the longest running campaigns at that time, had gotten past 14th level, and to him, that was real D&D. His statement regarding power trippers, which is what they were called back then, is different strokes for different folks, but that is not D&D. Gritty and dangerous, it's never been the only playstyle for Dungeons & Dragons. It did become the official default as the game was further iterated and standardized, but it's never been the only way it was played from its very earliest moments. Gary Gygax wasn't universally beloved by the early D&D community. TSR's attempts to standardize D&D, both to promote a specific playstyle and to keep character portability possible, met with some resistance. People were not happy with both the idea of anyone having control of D&D and some of the ways things were being standardized. A particular thorn was how magic users were handled. Wargamer Mark Swanson put it this way in an Amateur Press Association zine. I am a supporter of the slogan, D&D is too important to leave to Gary Gygax. Gygax has produced other games in the past. The problem has been that they are not interesting in their full form. They tend to be flawed by simple bad solutions to complex problems. Thus, in Gary Gygax's game, a magic user gets to use each spell once a day. Folks tend to regard Gary's accomplishments well now. And at the time, he was generally respected, but he was not above direct critical barbs, even as D&D was beginning its popular explosion. Take, for example, this creature's stat block from Alarms and Excursions number 15 as an example. A Gygax, 1 to 8 appear, armor class 6, move 12 inches, 6 HD, in lair 10% of the time with type C treasure. But does 2 to 8 damage. Bite, 1 to 3 damage, or weapon by type. These bull-headed men exactly resemble minotaurs, but are extremely and annoyingly lawful in nature. When encountered, they will insist upon everything being done their way, although they will insist that they favor individuality and diversity. Inclusion concerns have always been a thing in the hobby. In the 70s, there were folks who were concerned about why there weren't more women involved in wargaming. One such person, Jack Green, was a reporter who explored this question in the summer of 1975 as everything's beginning to explode. That summer, he interviewed Linda Mosca, hope I got her name correct, who would become the first woman to be published as a wargame designer. Linda, that spring, had already written on the topic, and Playing at the World highlights 2 points about her conclusions. First, male players didn't want to play against women because it hurt the male ego, and second, the women who were interested in miniature wargames tended to be drawn to fantasy. Don Greenwood of Avalon Hill and former editor of Panzerfaust wargaming zine was also interviewed by Green in 1975 and had a similar insight. He thought D&D was the avenue through which women would be drawn into the hobby. And Green wasn't only asking about the lack of women, he was wondering why it was so white as well. See, people asking questions about inclusion have been around at least as long as role-playing games have existed. There have always been concerns about the game giving offense. And there's 3 big examples that most folks know about. First, Gary himself had a policy to not reference any real-world religions in D&D when it was released. Second, 1983's re-release of the AD&D books came with new covers by Jeff Easley, which are fantastic, but they had demonic elements removed. And why was that? Well, because TSR was trying to get the books into toy stores. And third, all the devils and the demons got pulled from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. To be sure, blind spots have always existed, which caused both designers and the community to miss how they were causing offense. And the target audience is also always changing for the game, which alters the criteria for what's considered offensive. The demons and devils being taken out of 2nd edition AD&D. The target demographic had shifted. But being aware about giving offense has always been part of how the game is presented. And when the people who published these games caused offense, they heard about it. One case in point came when Len Lakofka's Women in Magic article, which was awash with sexism, was republished in The Dragon. John Peterson summarizes the response in Playing at the World. The community backlash to Lakofka's article was quite severe. A cartoon in A&E 19 depicted Gygax, Lakofka, and Dragon editor Tim Kask hung in effigy by a party of female adventurers who took exception to notes on women and magic. A limerick mocking Lakofka appeared an issue later, and in the one after that, so too would commentary like, "The Lakofka system for female characters needed to be blasted apart, as it drives women away from the game, beside being intrinsically illogical and sexist-oriented." Nazis have always been on the periphery of this hobby. At Origins 1 in 1975, there was a real concern Nazis would show up because their presence in the hobby was no secret. And when they didn't show up, it was a cause for a minor celebration. Everybody there was greatly relieved to find that no Nazis had emerged from their closets, or should that read bunkers. And thus were our liberal credentials established for use in mutual congratulations. Also, M.A.R. Barker, creator of Empire of the Petal Throne, was one of the earliest pioneers of creating new RPGs, so we're moving from wargaming section to the RPG section of the wider hobby. And in recent years, it was revealed to the public that he glorified Nazi ideology and served on the editorial board for a Holocaust-denying journal. Now, Nazis have never been a majority in this hobby space, and many of them knew to stay hidden, like Professor Barker. But they've always been around. Balance has always been a thing in the RPG space. Now, I understand this one needs some clarification, because back in the day, folks didn't seem to care much about balanced encounters. If a party was overmatched, they were expected to think on their feet to extract themselves from the situation, and if some characters died while doing so, their legend could live on in the stories the players told. And that mentality is, by the way, which makes the current practice of funnel games a lot of fun. And I do recommend folks try one out for a nice change of pace at least once, because they can be a blast. On the other hand, though, people were concerned about balance between characters. Why are non-human characters level capped? Because they had special abilities which required it to create balance between the party. Why did magic users have their spell casting nerfed? It was so fighters didn't become instantly useless. John Peterson summarizes it this way. He laid down this firm rule to prevent the game from devolving into a weird wizard show where players get bored quickly, arguing that the most desirable game is one in which the various character types are able to compete with each other as relative equals, for that will maintain freshness in the campaign. The importance of this fundamental principle of balancing the relative power of classes outweighed for Gygax the need for a referee's latitude. Now look, I know there are some longtime players who dislike how everyone's a caster now. And believe me, I feel this pain because everybody's a caster now. But I do have to admit that it springs from the very same impulse that's existed since OD&D, balanced character types. And while I think exploiting everyone's abilities brings on the boredom rather quickly, that's just my personal preference talking. There are folks who love more recent editions because of the high-powered characters, and they're just as much TTRPG players as anybody else. I am not a Grognard. Again, this does require some clarification. I do marvel that I jumped into the hobby so near its commercial arrival in 1974. It's something I find rather cool. At the same time, Basic Expert Dungeons & Dragons, the Mrblahface Cook Marsh edition, is the third iteration of the OD&D line and the fourth D&D iteration overall. I came into the hobby in its earlier stages, but the years before I even became aware of its existence, because I was born in 1973, brought about massive changes in style, tone, standardization, and core audience. Now, I have been grandfathered into Grognard status because I'm an older player. But a lot of us folks who came in with BX, and given how many OSR games use the Mrblahface Cook Basic and Expert rules as their framework, there are quite a few of us, we were not well regarded by the wider community at the time. We were munchkins. And our playstyle as kids was bemoaned by mature players. We were even referred to as munchkin hordes who revealed how the hobby would degrade if it became popular. In fact, all of the D&D playing characters in Stranger Things are munchkins. In The Elusive Shift, Peterson sums up the way older players regarded newer and often younger players. Sandwiched between an aging generation weaned on war games and an emerging generation not yet jaded by the rush of progression, the original clique of D&D players began to circle its wagons, in the process excluding people they saw as not like themselves. Now, we munchkins were playing pre-internet. We also couldn't drive, so many of us never knew that's how we were viewed by the folks who preceded us in the hobby. But the sentiment existed. And while our groups may not have functioned that way to circling the wagons, the wider hobby has always had a bit of a gatekeeping problem. Now, we now live in a connected world, and folks who have come into the hobby recently don't have the same luxury of not being aware of how they're viewed by older players who see recent adoptees as not us. Maybe you don't enjoy newer styles of play, or the emphasis on campaign paths instead of sandboxes, or ideas like formal player contracts. And the thing about ageism is that it's frequently a two-way street, so it's not like either younger or older players are free from this problem of thinking of the other group as not us. But learning to not gatekeep or bemoaning the existence of other playstyles, it would be a great lesson to take from our shared history. The thing about history, especially if it's something we've lived through, is we often remember it wrong. Or rather, we remember it in a way to make things more clear-cut than they actually were. And then we use those clear-cut distinctions, which come in hindsight, to prove that our way is how it's always been, and their way is new and dangerous to the future of the hobby. But the reality is our hobby formed out of a chaotic mess of pre-existing games, overlapping fandoms, and arguments about what these games even were. And all those cultural forces are still at play today. Being aware of that may help alter both our perceptions of the present and our reflections on the past. At least, I hope so. Folks, if you enjoyed this video, please do the like, comment, share routine for it. It really helps. Also, if you aren't subscribed, please consider doing so you don't miss any upcoming content. I have also been told by friends that unless you hit the bell, you may miss when I post because, well, YouTube can be inscrutable. Thanks so much to my coffee contributors who support this channel out of the kindness of their hearts. And if you'd like to help make some caffeine available to DM Tales, the link is right over there. Thank you so much. I am reading Dave Ward's Ironbound right now, and that will be the next review on the channel. After that will come Star Trek Adventures. Yes! This past week, I was able to interview Bodhi from Homie and the Dude about their current Kickstarter campaign for the system agnostic setting Scorched Basin. It was amazing. You can find the link to that chat right over there. A lot of live streams coming up as well. I'll be announcing those as we get those scheduled. And until we see each other again, folks, happy playing, everyone.